channel. In today's video, we're going to be checking out the all-new Transformers Buzzworthy Bumblebee Studio Series High Octane Bumblebee versus Decepticon Stinger. Now, these two guys are essentially just reissues, and in the form of Bumblebee, an incredibly old reissue. Honestly, I was really hoping that we'd actually see an entirely brand new mold for High Octane Bumblebee, and even on the package, this does refer to High Octane Bumblebee as Studio Series 77, and considering that we haven't as of yet actually seen what that 77 number is going to be in the Studio Series, I'm praying that Hasbro do indeed pull out a brand new mold and they don't just repack this particular figure. But as it stands, it is looking like this will be our High Octane Bumblebee for Studio Series, and if so, I think that'll be such a shame, as honestly this guy came out in 2014 and I'm pretty certain Hasbro and Takara Tomy could do so much better when compared to what they did put out when the original TF4 movie did hit the screen. Now in this video, I'll merely be focusing on High Octane Bumblebee, as I already have a very old review of the Studio Series Stinger over on the channel. This guy is essentially the exact same figure that we got packaged in the first wave, so we'll very quickly cover the details. You can see a pretty decent looking robot mode. Personally, I've always found this figure to be one of the weakest Studio Series figures. Maybe it's because the design really doesn't lend itself to actually translate well into a figure. In the movie, Stinger of course broke up into millions of tiny little molecules to form the robot and of course the vehicle mode, so compromises had to be made in order to create a very sleek robot mode which could ultimately transform into a killer looking Pagani. But you can see here the detail is pretty decent, but in this video we'll be setting him off to the side and taking a look here at High Octane Bumblebee. Honestly, this set's really given me an excuse to kickstart my look back videos on some of the old Age of Extinction figures, and to be fair, High Octane Bumblebee definitely isn't a bad one to start off with. To me at least, he was one of the better deluxe figures that we got from that original line, albeit not entirely perfect. Now you can see that in regards to detail, the face sculpt, at least to me, looks killer. I think the sculpt work is super impressive, and the gunmetal silver they've applied, as well as now this brand new metallic blue, really does pop. If I recall correctly, the original version had a very light blue used for the eyes, which didn't look the best, and he also had light piping, meaning that you could see some of the areas which weren't painted the best, whereas this guy has this entire section filled out a little more. You can see that it's not completely clear, which I actually think works in the figure's favour. We've got some collarbone sections which can become slightly tedious in regards to articulation, but I love how they did in fact use the real front section of the vehicle mode to fill out the chest. You can see some nice detailing going on here for the lower torso region. The arms are very small, and that was definitely an issue I had on the original release, and of course considering this is a reissue, that problem still does retain. And I'm also not a huge fan that they've now used yellow plastic here for the elbow joints, as I would have much rather have gotten the same colour of gunmetal or grey that we've got here for the bicep and of course the forearm. And I'm also not a massive fan here of the sculpt of the hands, so really hoping that we can in fact get a new mould of this guy. But you can see I love the smoky plastic that we've got going on here for the windows when we get him transformed up into that killer 67 Camaro. They really are going to look impressive. You can see some pretty nice detailing where the back of the wheels is concerned. We can see some nice hydraulics, but of course this guy came at a time when Age of Extinction truly were giving us some of the worst mainline toys, so you can see that he is very thin, very spindly, and of course there really isn't much substance to him at all. He does feel incredibly lightweight, which is still an issue that this reissue possesses. Now they have opted to give him this time a yellow blaster, which I think looks terrible. This once again wasn't the best when the original figure came out, and it adds even further insult to injury to cast this out of yellow, as on the original it was gunmetal, and this just to me looks awful. But you can see some nice details where the actual blaster section is concerned, but this missile is just super weak. As we turn our attention down to the lower section of Bumblebee, you can see pretty decent sculpt work. I'm not a big fan of the hollow gaps that we've got going on for the shins, but it's definitely not the end of the world, and you can see some nice sculpt work going on here for the foot, albeit looking incredibly flat when in comparison to some of the more recent Bumblebees. Now getting down to articulation, this guy of course has got a ball joint which can look left to right as well as up and down ever so slightly. We do get a hinge joint here at the shoulder, ratchet joints out to the sides which is pretty decent, a full range of motion here just above the elbow, a ratcheted joint here at the elbow which can bend slightly past 90, which is wicked. Sadly no wrist nor waist articulation, the legs can kick forwards that far as well as back to that far, which is pretty cool. They can also ratchet out to the sides, rotation at the thigh, 90-degree bend here at the actual knee, albeit placed at a very high position. This is more of a thigh hinge joint than anything, as you can see the shin is enormous whereas the thigh is incredibly small, so definitely some wonky proportions going on with this guy. And considering he is a much older release, sadly we don't get any form of ankle rocker pivot, which once again is just such a shame. But to be fair, considering he came out in 2014, I still think that it's a pretty decent mold, and it definitely does a good job in resembling Bumblebee's evasion mode from Age of Extinction. Here for a Bumblebee size comparison, you can see that this Age of Extinction reissue is in fact one of the biggest Studio Series figures that we've seen so far, towering over both the 77 Camaro Clunker Bee as well as the Revenge of the Fallen Bumblebee. And I actually think the Clunker Bee would be a great basis mold to actually reinvent this figure. All they'd really have to do is change the exterior of the shell for the vehicle mode, but the robot mode could essentially stay exactly the same. So once again, really holding out hope that this isn't our Studio Series High Octane Bumblebee and that this is merely just a lazy cash grab on Hasbro's part. Before getting down down to transformation, I just very quickly want to demonstrate the actual functionality here of the missile. So unlike some of the previous movie toys, Age of Extinction did opt to go with pressure force missiles instead of the more traditional spring-loaded missiles. And to be fair, this didn't work too bad at all. So you simply just want to essentially hold the base of this as well as this section, and of course push that, and it would fire off to quite a considerable degree. And of course, if you did hate the colour of cast yellow that they used on this, you could just set this here off to the side to create for a slightly more neutral look for Bumblebee, which to be honest with you, I actually think looks a heck of a lot better. So transformation for Bumblebee. Age of Extinction was notorious for having incredibly simplistic conversions, and B here is a prime example of that. Not to mention that the materials used to actually put this guy together are some of the cheapest, some of the crappiest that I've ever seen on a mainline figure. So definitely take your time when manipulating some of the joints, especially where that clear plastic is concerned. But to begin with, you're going to want to come here to the legs and just snap them there into place. We can then come here to the torso, disengage these panels from this square peg. Once that's completed, you're going to want to spin your attention here to the back, take this section and try your best to wriggle this here down until it does in fact actually snap into place. So pull this all the way out, clip that there into place just like so, bring this around. What we can then do is angle this here to the back, and you can see we've got some tabs and slots that the windshield there will clip into. We'll then turn our attention here to this back section, just align these up appropriately, and of course repeat the same process, snap the rear section in, and then spin your attention to the arms, and we're just going to want to ratchet these sections in, rotate here at the biceps so that the arm guard is now facing inwards, and repeat the same process here for this side. So just bring this in, rotate at the bicep, and then join this tab to that slot. Just snap all of that into place. We can then take the hood, snap that into place, take these two panels, clip them together, fold the wheels in, and then this hood will actually go over the top of these two tabs. So just snap that in there. Come to the doors, you can see a transparent peg that will peg into this slot. And one thing which is actually quite nice to note is that we've got some pretty decent interior door detailing, which is something they didn't have to do. But personally, I would have much rather them actually put this engineering into the plastic and into the transformation than into a piece that you're more than likely never going to see. So then just snap that in, and there you've got High Octane Bumblebee fully transformed up into the 1967 Camaro, I believe it is. So this is his High Octane evasion mode, and to be honest with you, out of the two Camaros that he sports in the movie, I actually really liked this. I thought that it was a great redesign for the character to get him in a more predominantly black colour scheme, and especially considering that at that point in Transformers Prime, Bumblebee was in a vehicle mode which looked very similar to this. But in regards to sculpt, this looks wicked. This is no doubt how I'll actually be keeping this figure, and here's hoping that the real Studio Series 77B does turn out to be a new sculpt, and that it absolutely obliterates this guy, as it's still not 100% perfect. I would have much rather the transparent plastic used here for the top actually be cast out of solid black plastic so that you couldn't see any of the interior, especially considering this guy's incognito. You don't want to actually see that he is a Transformer. I would have loved to have actually seen these pieces painted in black as well, as that definitely does break up the sculpt. But you can see some nice detailing where the hubcaps are concerned. As we spin our attention here to the back, you can see there the SS Camaro insignia, which is a really nice touch, the yellow stripe, and here from a bird's eye perspective you can see some pretty decent sculpt work. We've even got the SS there on the side of the vehicle. So overall, in regards to vehicle mode, this is definitely the best mode, at least in my personal opinion. Size comparison wise, we've got High Octane Bumblebee compared next to Age of Extinction Stinger, as well as the 1977 Clunker Bumblebee Camaro. And I'll just give you a comparison firstly between these two figures. You can see in vehicle mode actually pretty close, considering this was a giant in bot mode. So once again, really hoping that they actually use this as the basis. You can see that just in terms of actual plastic quality and the actual weight, this feels so much more substantial than this. This really was a light and flimsy piece of crap for a deluxe class, to be entirely honest. And here for a comparison next to Stinger, you can see how those two fare. I believe we only actually see these two in vehicle mode together when Bumblebee does go to the showroom where he's first introduced to Stinger, which is of course inspired by Bumblebee, but better in every way. So, some final thoughts for this Transformers Buzzworthy Bumblebee Age of Extinction Studio Series High Octane Bumblebee versus Decepticon Stinger 2-pack. Well, if you haven't as of yet already picked up either of these two figures, then I would say that it's a pretty decent 2-pack, especially considering that the Studio Series Stinger is actually quite hard to obtain now. But the High Octane Bumblebee, if you've already got Stinger, I would definitely recommend giving this a pass, or at least holding off until we get an official announcement by Hasbro and Takara as to what that Studio Series 77 High Octane Bumblebee will actually turn out to be. If it is just going to be a mere reuse of this guy, honestly that's going to be a major letdown. It may in fact be one of the biggest letdowns that the Studio Series has given us so far, as this figure is just super outdated, especially when in comparison to the likes of Clunker Bumblebee, which is pretty darn similar in terms of design. So really all they've got to do is change the exterior of that figure, and bang, you've got yourself a brand new High Octane Bumblebee, which is so much more accurate when in comparison to this guy. I don't think that it's a terrible figure, especially in vehicle mode. I think it looks pretty awesome, but in regards to materials, transformation, and overall quality, it definitely does pale in comparison to what we've seen from the likes of the War for Cybertron trilogy as well as previous Studio Series figures. So with all that being said, that just about wraps up my review. I'd love to know what you guys think of this 2-pack. Will you be adding it to your collection? Are you optimistic that Hasbro may in fact actually give us a new mold for High Octane Bumblebee, or do you guys believe that they'll just go the lazy route and reissue this as a single carded release? I'd love to know what you think of the figures as well as the review down in the comment section below, and until my next review, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.